Hi everyone, it's James from JVC Paints. I'm doing something a little bit different today, something I've never done before, which is a review of one of the campaign books from Warlord Games and Osprey Games, Fortress Budapest. So if you've been watching the channel for a while, you know that I really like painting miniatures, I really like World War II, I really like bold action, so I mean, you know, this is a no-brainer. I've had these books before, but I've kind of waited, I've never really gotten into them, and to be honest, you know, a lot of the other campaign books never really floated my boat. I enjoyed them, but this one I really enjoyed reading through it yesterday, and I took some notes I thought I would share with everybody. You know, maybe you're sitting on the fence as to whether or not you'd like to pick it up. So I'll just go through it, tell you what's in it, maybe talk about some of the new units and stuff like that. So it's by Brian Cook. It's 168 pages. It's got 16 scenarios. It's got a bunch of it's got some new theater selectors in it, and if you got it from Warlord Games, you get the special miniature. Here he is. Fortress Budapest special model, and I'm going to butcher this name, Idomer Tassini. But anywho, so yeah, this is the book. Like I said, like most of the campaign books, I should say, it starts off with sort of a brief setting of the scene of where they are in the war. Here's the table of contents. You want to take a look at that. So, but the introduction for a lot of these books is generally the same. They just have a bit of an overview, what's going on. And then it's got a brief synopsis of the Royal Hungarian Army. It's got a lot of terms that if you aren't a native speaker of Hungarian, I'm sure you'll mangle with your friends as you try to get through them. But yeah, it's got some great illustrations. It's got some figures. It's a lot of the figures we've seen before, but there are some newer ones. So yeah, I'm gonna go through some of the scenarios here and talk about them, and then also some of the sort of other special things that are in the book. So hang in there. Let's take a look. The first section of scenarios in the book is fighting for Transylvania, the initial Soviet and I guess Romanian invasion of Hungary. So the first scenario is called Hold the Adzotsi Pass. In this one, the Axis are on this end. This is a free bunker they have, and the Soviets are trying to control this road. So the Soviets deploy here. It's on a 6x4 table. You could probably do it on a 4x4 table if you're doing a smaller game, I think. But basically, the Soviets get an extra 25% in points. So if the Axis is doing 1,000 points, the Soviets get 1,250. There's no outflank in this one. This is basically the Soviets kind of just steamrolling their way into Hungary and trying to get into the plain there, the Transylvanian plain, I guess. But the next scenario, let me just skip through here. Here we go. Next one is Into the Valley of Death. This one. Basically, the Soviets are using like a tank war selector, almost like a tank platoon, basically. But they can only have 75mm Sherman, Lend-Lease Shermans. Hungarians are in this end here. Again, it's 6x4. Hungarians can start hidden, and I think in an ambush as well. There's no outflank here. No, they can't start an ambush, pardon me. But yeah, this again, it's a direct assault. So basically, the Soviets are trying to get to there, and the Hungarians have to stop them. In the last one, here it is, the last one, Operation Debrecen, I guess is how you'd pronounce it. Soviets are kind of surrounded. They've gotten themselves in a bit of trouble, so they start up this bridge. And this one has some pretty interesting deployment rules. Again, the Soviets can only they're using a tank platoon, but they can only have 75mm Shermans. And there's an access list in the book as well that you can use. So you've got the Hungarians and the Germans. The Germans will come in on turn 3, and it's got some pretty interesting outflanking rules here that would definitely confuse drunker players. But basically, whoever controls the sort of central objective here, on turn 3, they can determine where the Germans come in for their outflanking force, I guess. And basically, you have to hold the objective, and then the units will come in. And so if the Soviets are holding this, they can decide where the Germans come in. If the Germans are holding it, they can determine where they come in. If neither player holds the objective, basically the Axis are going to come in from a random table edge. And the Axis, they come on no matter what. There's no role for them, whereas the Soviets, anything that they have that's coming in to reinforce, they've got a role for. So that's the first section of the book. Let's take a look at the next one, which is Encirclement. The next section of scenarios is from Encirclement. Again, there's three scenarios here, and let's check out the first one. First one is called Flak Regiment 133. So here we go. The Soviets coming in. This is a 6x4 table. The Axis, you can see they're sort of hemmed in. They've got this little village here that they've got to protect. But basically in this one, there's some battle-specific rules, one of which is that if the Axis takes an air observer, they get Rudel, the famous Stuka pilot, so they get some special rules on how ignoring the bad results, I guess, if you call in your airstrike. So it's pretty much a safe airstrike, which is pretty good, I think. Again, because the Soviets here, they get an extra 25 points, 25%, I should say, to whatever the Axis will be fielding. So it's if it's a heavy anti-aircraft battery, so there's going to be a lot of anti-tank guns on this end. And again, the Soviets are coming in here, and they're using a mechanized brigade, which is a selector in the book. The next one we should check out here is called the Attila Line. You can see there's this anti-tank ditch here. So the Hungarians and the Axis table edge, they have a huge deployment zone here. And in this one, there's some night fighting. The Hungarians get to start in ambush and hidden. The Soviets get a free T-34-85. The anti-tank ditch sort of stops the tanks, so they can't get past it. But there's a single objective really deep inside on the Axis table edge. So I think this one might be a little bit more tricky for the Soviets to pull off a victory if the Hungarian player or the Axis player is really good at deployment. And then the last one in this section here is the counterattack at Peszentsomir. I'm sure I mispronounced that. If you're a native speaker of Hungarian, please let me know. But basically, this one has a tank war. We're using tank platoons for the Soviets, and they encourage you to take a JS2, which is pretty heavy points-wise, I think. But anyways, the Soviets get a preliminary bombardment. The Germans start all on the board, and the Soviets are all enter at turn one. So yeah, this is a bit of a slugfest. You can see it's a lot of open ground, farmers' fields, just some woods at the end. And the Germans, they get to set up right in the middle of the open ground. So this is an interesting one too. After this, we're going to check out the Festung Budapest, the actual street fighting. In the Festung Budapest section of the book, there are 3 scenarios, and these are the ones that I personally when I was reading it yesterday, were the most excited about. The first one is called Backdoor Left Open, and this is a city fighting one. So there's no outflank here. The Axis suffer the first dice sort of communication breakdown every turn. So if an Axis, so basically, if the Allied player, the Soviet player wants, they can get the first dice every turn. So none of this, who's going to get the first dice in turn 4? It's going to be the Soviets. The Hungarian units start on in this particular one. The Hungarian units start on the board, and the German reinforcements can only show up on turn 3. And it's a very heavy urban board. Basically, I think the objective for the Soviets is they want to take this hospital, and there's some historical background here that talks about how the Soviets did in fact get to that hospital, and then how the Axis took it back. The next one, scenario 8, is street fighting in Pest, which I guess is on the east side of the Danube River. Yeah. Anyways, again, this is actually a smaller one. It's on a 4x4 table, and there's no outflank. The Axis start with half, so they're doing the 4 foot by 2 foot. So they've got their zone. They're already started. The Soviets come in half on turn 1, rounding down, of course, and then the rest come in reserve. Both armies can choose from a list of assets in the back of the book, and they have these things called siege assets, which are really interesting, which I'm going to get into later. But it sort of adds a new dynamic to the game. But then the next scenario 9, which is called Withdrawal Across the Danube. Again, they have the siege assets in play. This is an urban environment, and the Soviets actually they get a free airstrike. This is also played on a 4x4 board, as you can see, and I think the first one was too. So me personally, I mean, the first section of the book with those scenarios were kind of interesting. They're kind of more open ground, a lot of room for tanks. These urban fighting ones are the ones that I really like. These are the ones that I'm drawn to. And you'll see in the next part here, the next section, there's a lot more tank war and weather-specific ones that are coming on too. So just give me a second here and let me prepare that. The next couple scenarios in the book here are under the relief attempt heading. There's only 2 in it, and they're Operation Conrad 1 and Operation Conrad 2. And in both of these, it's just the Germans sort of launching their surprise Panzer Corps, sort of counterattack into the Soviet flank. So in number one, it's a winter battle. It's tank wars for the Germans. Tank wars for the Germans for picking your army list. Lots of roads. Soviets have a 25% advantage in points. Again, here they have some interesting dice pulling rules here for when the Soviets have to match the German number of dice. So, for example, the Germans have like 10 dice and the Soviets have 16 dice. The Soviets can only pull 10 of their dice, if that makes any sense. So, once the German dice are finished, that's the end of the turn. But at the same time, the Soviet units already deployed or on the table, if you're not even going to use a dice, they can still go down. So if the Germans say, okay, I'm going to fire at those guys, behind these trees here, and there's no dice for them, you could go down with them. So it's a new little interesting dynamic. I don't know how it would play. I've never really played Tank War. I've got heaps of tanks, but we never actually seem to get around to doing it, just because transporting vehicles is kind of a bit problem. It's a bit of a problem to do here, especially when you have to go far away. In the next scenario, Conrad 2, there's the map here. In Conrad 2, we just have the one single road, and again, the Germans are using tank war or tankless. The Soviets can choose whether they want tank war or not. You bring half of your guys on. There's night fighting with this one, but the Germans have their infrared technology, so it's an envelopment scenario for the Germans. They're trying to get their tanks, off the board onto the Soviet edge. But it's kind of cool. Not a lot of cover, but you can see here. Big gaps and things like that. So it's kind of interesting. After this, the next couple scenarios are all about actually fighting in Budapest on the Buda side of the river. Let's check it out. Got 4 scenarios. Again, they're all urban, and they're all very, very interesting, I've got to say. This one, scenario 12, is it's called Farkasredi Cemetery. I'm sure I mispronounced that. If anybody can speak Hungarian, please let me know how you actually pronounce it. But basically, it's a 4x4 table, and you have d6 plus 1 objectives. Now, half rounding up come on the first wave. This is talking about your forces. There's no outflank, and we have siege assets again in this. The Germans can enter in the first turn on any of the objective markers not under Soviet control. So, basically, the Soviets will start here, the Germans will be down here, whether the objective markers, and the Germans can sort of just pop up wherever they want, which is kind of neat. It kind of reminds me of, I've only played Chain of Command once, but it kind of seems like that sort of deployment sort of idea, instead of just sort of like the table edge kind of thing. So basically, the Germans can be deployed with an ambush or fire order. They can also run or advance. So there's no assaults on the first turn as the units show up. But the usual control objectives, control is how can I say it? It's normal. You got nobody within 3x3. And also, when you have control of an objective, so this counts for the Soviets as well, you can deploy from that objective marker. So that's an actual interesting one. So they've got the cemetery, they've got tombstones, they've got a big chapel here, things like that. The next one is kind of a neat one too. It's called the Buda Hills. It's 4x4. It's centered around about a group of villas here. Basically, the Soviets have to set up all their stuff within an 8-inch radius of this. And the access can enter from either their edge or the neutral edges as well. And it's got dawn assault, and the idea is that the Soviets are all kind of drunk and partying up on the fantastic bull's blood wine they've found, and they all start. Every single unit has to roll for D3 pins, so it's kind of like a preliminary bombardment, but you're not going to lose anybody. But you never know. It's one of these things that it could hamper you, turn 1, turn 2. But I guess by turn 3, turn 4, they've sobered up a little bit. But this is a dawn assault, and there's also some night fighting rules. So that's kind of an interesting scenario again. I'm really liking the ones that are in the city. This is another one. It doesn't look like it's in the city, but it is. You can just sort of make it out there. Again, a 4x4 board. This one is called Supply Drop. And Supply Drop is kind of cool. It kind of reminds me of Operation Market Garden, or if you've ever seen the German Stalingrad film from 1993 by Willesmeyer, where they get the drop sort of right at the end as Stalingrad is about to fall back to the Soviets. It's kind of a similar thing. So basically, 6x4. Pardon me, it's a 6x4 table. Sorry. It's mostly an open park with some buildings on the fridges. There's D3 plus 3 canisters, and these are all the objective markers. So the special rules: you get within 3 inches of the canister on the move, that unit will halt. So the unit will halt, and then there's a table that they have here. I'll just take a quick peek at it so you can check it out. And your unit rolls, and you know, it can contain medical supplies. Gets you 4 of extra victory points for if you roll a 6. If you get a 1, you know, it's like that movie Stalingrad. You get Iron Cross medals. There's nothing happens. It's just basically end of turn kind of thing. But it's, you know, it's interesting. So they've added that little dynamic, which I think is kind of cool. In this case, so if even on your advanced move, you would stop and you wouldn't even get to shoot if you get within 3 inches of that marker. There's also the kind of interesting thing here. I believe it's on turn 4. There's a glider crash that just happens randomly. So the crash is randomized, creates a crater. Units under the crater will take a medium howitzer hit. And units 12 inches from the center of the crater, not the lip, roll on a chart, and resulting in pins up to a medium howitzer hit in a building. So dice are used here, no template, I believe. So you would be rolling, I forget what a medium howitzer is against a building. I think it's D6. I don't think it's 2D6. I haven't, nobody goes into buildings anymore, so I don't really remember. But still, I mean, it's one of these things that could really sort of, you know, put the game into somebody's pocket, you know, on turn 4, just randomly, which I thought, it's kind of cool. It's a neat little dynamic. It makes it a little bit more interesting. And then the last one here is called the Last Redoubt. And basically, this is the Hungarians. They've got an avenue. Here's the postal office. And they've got a street. The Soviets are coming this way. They've got things set up here. And here with this one, again, the Soviets, they get a free T-34-85. It's played on a 4x4 board, as you can see here. The Hungarians can start hidden in an ambush. It is like Envelopment, I believe. No, pardon me. It's city siege assets are in play, and the Soviets nominate half their force for the first wave. Now the last one, it's not part of this. It's just called Hitler's Last Gamble. It's called the Death Ride of the Panzers. And you can see that Soviet zone. It's pretty beast. So here come the Germans. Are going to come in on this side, and this is sort of like the end of this is the end of the end. You know, the beginning of the end, I guess. Basically, it's 6x4. All the Germans come on in one wave. The Soviets start halfway. They deploy up to 36 inches onto the table, as you can see. And they're numbered. The units are numbered. You put down poker chips or coins or some kind of marker, and you would have your, you know, with numbers on them, and you would have mark them off against a list that you would make, saying, okay, this is an anti-tank gun, or this is the free squad, or this is a tank, or something like that. So the Germans don't know what they're walking into. They can be given ambush orders, of course, and they count as hidden. So as the guys get closer, as the Germans get closer, they'll reveal themselves, especially if they have what's the word I'm looking for? If they have scout vehicles, armored cars, things like that. It's kind of like Envelopment, but the difference here is that the Germans only have to get within 12 inches of the Soviet edge. So they only have got to get to this last square. They don't have to get off the table to get the extra the points. So yeah, those are the scenarios. I'm going to talk about some of the units and stuff here and some of the special rules. So let's check it out.